3 weeks after my wife's funeral, I was standing alone in my kitchen with flour on my hands when I found a sealed envelope hidden inside an old pancake mix box. And suddenly, nothing about my life felt real anymore. I remember just standing there for a second. The cabinet door was still hanging open beside me. One hinge squeaked every time it moved. Linda used to complain about that hinge constantly, and every time I told her I'd fix it this weekend. Funny how you stop hearing little things after 30 years. Then one day the house gets quiet enough that every sound feels like a ghost. Outside, rain tapped softly against the kitchen window over the sink. Tulsa weather in late October, gray sky, cold, damp air sneaking through the old frame, no matter how much insulation I'd stuffed around it over the years. I looked down at the envelope again. My name was written across the front in Linda's handwriting. Danny. Nobody called me Danny anymore except her. My daughter Emily had been after me for days to clean the house. "You can't keep living like this, Dad." That's what she'd said 2 nights earlier while throwing away expired yogurt from the refrigerator. You need a fresh start. Fresh start. People love saying that after funerals. Like grief's a room you eventually walk out of if somebody opens enough windows. The truth was, I hadn't touched most of the kitchen since Linda died. Her reading glasses still sat beside the coffee maker. One of her grocery lists was clipped to the refrigerator with a magnet from Branson, Missouri. Half the spices in the cabinet were probably older than our daughter's marriage. But that night I finally forced myself to start cleaning. Mostly because the silence in the house had gotten unbearable. I'd been sleeping in my recliner for nearly a month. Couldn't handle the bedroom. Every time I walked past it, I could still picture Linda curled under 3 blankets during chemo, apologizing for being cold all the time. So instead, I stayed up late drinking burnt coffee and organizing cabinets nobody was going to care about after I sold the place. I was halfway through the baking shelf when I found the box. Old pancake mix shoved all the way in the back corner behind canned peaches and a rusted bundt pan. Something about it felt odd immediately, heavier than it should have been. I picked it up and noticed the top had been taped shut carefully. That stopped me cold. Linda wasn't a tape person. I opened it slowly. Inside the powdery bag sat a sealed white envelope. And just like that, my chest tightened. I actually checked the back door lock before opening it. Don't ask me why, I still can't explain it. Maybe grief sharpens instincts you ignored your whole life. I slid my finger under the flap carefully. Inside was a brass key. One sheet of paper with an address typed neatly across the top. A password written underneath. And one handwritten sentence. Danny, only open this if I'm gone, and please don't tell Kevin. I read it 3 times. Kevin. Out of all people. I leaned back against the counter, suddenly dizzy. Kevin Hanley had been my best friend since 1987. We built Mercer Heating and Air together from 2 trucks in a rented storage garage near East Admiral Boulevard. Back when Tulsa summers felt hotter and both our knees still worked properly. Kevin stayed beside me through everything. When the business collapsed in 2008, he was there. When Linda got diagnosed, he brought casseroles. Hell, he sat beside me at the hospital 2 days before she died. And yet Linda had hidden this from him. Or maybe from me. I rubbed my hand across my face and accidentally smeared flour onto my cheek. That's when an old memory came back hard enough to make me uncomfortable. About 8 years earlier, Linda and I had argued quietly in this same kitchen after Kevin left one evening. Nothing dramatic. She'd simply said, "You trust people too easily, Danny." I remember laughing. Kevin's the only one still helping us. Linda didn't answer after that. Just kept washing dishes silently. At the time, I thought she was being unfair. Now standing there holding that envelope, I felt something ugly moving around in my stomach. Around 9 the next morning, I drove downtown. The vault address led to a private security storage building near Boston Avenue. Plain brick exterior, frosted windows, small brass sign near the entrance. Nothing flashy. I almost turned around twice. Not because I was scared exactly. More because I suddenly wasn't sure I wanted answers. At my age, you spend years making peace with your mistakes. You organize them neatly in your mind. Tell yourself you survived them. What if Linda was about to tear all that open again? Inside, the woman at the desk barely spoke. She checked the key and password, then escorted me downstairs to a private vault room. Cold air, concrete walls. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I noticed 2 men in dark suits near the lobby when we came in. One of them glanced toward me briefly while pretending to check his phone. Could have meant nothing. Still bothered me. The vault itself was smaller than I expected. Inside sat 3 USB drives, 2 thick folders, a spiral notebook, and a stack of photographs rubber banded together. I carried everything to the small viewing table with hands that suddenly didn't feel steady anymore. The first folder contained bank statements. The second had invoices from Mercer Heating and Air dated back nearly 15 years. I frowned immediately. Some of the signatures looked like mine, but they weren't. I opened the notebook next. Linda's handwriting covered every page. Dates, transfer amounts, company names, notes in the margins. And then I saw it. Kevin Hanley. Again, and again, and again, beside thousands of missing dollars. My mouth went dry. I turned another page. At the top, Linda had written one sentence carefully in black ink. Your company did not fail by accident. I just stared at it for a long time. Then I heard footsteps somewhere upstairs. And for the first time since burying my wife, I realized Linda hadn't left me memories. She'd left me a war. I barely slept the night after opening that vault. Not because I was scared, because every memory I had trusted for the last 15 years suddenly felt unstable. You ever realize your life story might have been built on the wrong explanation? That's what it felt like. Around 2 in the morning, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table with Linda's notebook open beside a cold cup of Folgers, staring at invoices I'd already read 6 times. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Rainwater dripped from the gutters outside. And every few minutes I'd look toward the hallway, without thinking, like Linda might walk out in her robe and tell me to quit obsessing and go to bed. Instead, there was only silence. I picked up one invoice again. A compressor unit purchased from 2007. $34,000. Problem was, I remembered that year clearly. We never ordered that many units at once. Couldn't have afforded it. Linda had circled the invoice in red pen. Underneath, she'd written vendor address does not exist. I leaned back slowly. That's when the memories started rearranging themselves in my head. Back in 2008, when Mercer Heating and Air collapsed, I blamed myself completely. Everybody did. The recession hit Oklahoma hard. Construction projects dried up overnight. People stopped replacing units unless their air conditioner literally caught fire. I figured I'd expanded too quickly. Too many trucks, too much equipment financing, too much trust in commercial contracts that disappeared. I spent years replaying every business decision in my mind like game film after a losing season. And Kevin stayed right beside me through all of it. That's what made this hurt so bad. He took me out drinking when payroll checks bounced, helped negotiate with suppliers, talked me down when I nearly lost the house. Hell, when Linda started chemo. Years later, Kevin brought over frozen lasagnas and sat beside her, talking about old fishing trips like nothing had changed. I trusted that man more than some blood relatives. And Linda knew it. That part made me feel sick. I remembered little things now. Tiny moments I ignored because they didn't fit the story I wanted. Linda getting quiet whenever Kevin visited. The way she watched him when he talked. One Thanksgiving, she caught me signing paperwork Kevin brought over and asked, "What exactly are you signing?" I laughed it off. "Relax, honey, it's refinancing paperwork." Now I wondered if she already suspected something back then. By sunrise, my chest hurt from stress and too much coffee. I finally stood up and opened the back door for air. Cold Oklahoma wind rolled through the yard. The maple tree Linda planted 20 years ago had already lost most of its leaves. They scraped across the driveway softly. I suddenly felt old. Not dramatic old, just tired in my bones. The kind of tired that sneaks up on men after 60. I went back inside and opened another folder. That's when I found the shell company paperwork. Prairie Ridge Mechanical, LLC. Registered under the name of Kevin's cousin, Scott Hanley. Linda had highlighted dozens of transactions between our company and that business. Payments for equipment that never existed. Service contracts tied to fake addresses. Slowly, horribly, the truth started becoming obvious. Kevin hadn't stolen everything at once. He'd bled us slowly for years. Carefully enough that nobody noticed until the recession gave him cover. And me. I'd signed half the paperwork myself while exhausted out of my mind, trying to keep the business alive and take care of Linda during her first cancer scare. I rubbed my hands over my face hard. God damn it, I whispered. Not angry yet. Humiliated. That was worse. Around noon, my phone rang. Kevin. Just seeing his name made my stomach tighten. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Danny Ben trying to check on you. Same warm voice, same easy tone. I hated how normal it sounded. Yeah, I said, I'm all right. You eating okay? Funny thing about liars, sometimes they mix real concern into the act. Makes it harder to separate what was fake. We talked a few minutes about meaningless stuff. Weather, football, some road construction downtown. Then I heard myself say, you want to grab a beer later? Small pause. Sure, Kevin answered. Same place. By 6 o'clock, I was sitting across from him at Murphy's Sports Bar off Sheridan. The place hadn't changed in 20 years. Sticky tables, cheap neon beer signs, waitresses who called everybody Han. A baseball game played silently on the television over the bar, while old country music hummed through the speakers. Kevin looked older than I remembered. Still broad-shouldered but softer around the neck now, gray spreading through his beard. For one dangerous second, I almost convinced myself Linda had been wrong, that maybe there was some misunderstanding buried in all those documents. Then Kevin smiled casually and said, You finally cleaning out Linda's things yet? And every hair on my arms lifted. He said it too quickly, too carefully casual. I kept my face steady. Little bit. Kevin nodded slowly while peeling the label off his beer bottle. That kind of stuff's hard. I studied him quietly. 37 years of friendship sitting across from me eating bar peanuts. I kept wondering, did he ever feel guilty? Or did men like Kevin survive by never letting guilt in at all? You remember those refinancing papers from 2008, I asked finally. Just enough pressure to test him. Kevin took a drink before answering. Barely, whole period's a blur. Lie. I could hear it immediately now. Not because of the words. Because he suddenly stopped making eye contact. The rest of the conversation felt strange after that. Too careful. Like both of us were standing on thin ice, pretending not to hear cracks underneath. When we finally walked outside, the air had turned colder. Kevin clapped my shoulder. You call if you need anything, all right? Need anything? I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded and got in my truck. Halfway home, I noticed headlights behind me. Dark SUV. Maybe coincidence. But every turn I made, it stayed there. My pulse started climbing. Finally, near my neighborhood, the SUV turned away without warning. I sat at the stop sign another few seconds, watching taillights disappear. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my nerves felt raw. Then I noticed the side garage door slightly open. Just a few inches. I froze. I knew I locked it before leaving. Slowly, I walked toward it. The garage smelled like motor oil and old sawdust. Nothing looked missing at first glance. But when I stepped inside the house, I stopped cold. Linda's notebook was no longer where I left it on the kitchen table. It sat 3 feet away near the sink. Like somebody had picked it up and put it back down fast. I stood there in complete silence. Then I looked toward the dark hallway leading deeper into the house. And for the first time in years, I was afraid inside my own home. I didn't call the police. Looking back now, maybe I should have. But what exactly was I supposed to say? Somebody may have moved my notebook. At best, I'd sound like a grieving old man losing his mind. At worst, Kevin would know for sure I'd found something. So instead, I locked every door in the house, pulled the blinds shut, and sat awake half the night in my recliner, with Linda's notebook on my lap and an old .38 revolver in the side table drawer beside me. I hadn't touched that gun in years. Tulsa got quiet after midnight, real quiet. You notice different sounds when you live alone. Ice maker clicking, water pipes settling, branches scraping the roof. Every little noise feels personal somehow. Around 3 in the morning, I finally got up and started checking the house again. Not because I heard anything. Because my nerves wouldn't let me sit still. I walked room to room slowly. Guest bedroom, laundry room, hall closet. When I reached Linda's sewing room, I stopped. That room still looked exactly the same as the day she left for hospice. Half-finished fabric folded over the chair, reading lamp beside her recliner, tiny sewing scissors sitting neatly on the table. For months during chemo, she spent hours in there sewing quilts for church donation drives. Said it helped keep her hands busy while poison dripped into her veins. I stood in the doorway a long moment before walking in. Then something hit me. Linda hid important things inside that room constantly. Birthday cash, jewelry, spare house keys. She used to joke, if a burglar ever comes in here, he'll die of boredom before he finds anything. Without really thinking, I walked over to her old Singer sewing cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. Thread, fabric, instruction manuals. Then underneath a folded piece of blue flannel, I found another USB drive wrapped carefully in a sandwich bag. I closed my eyes. Jesus, Linda. Back in the kitchen, I plugged the drive into my laptop. At first, nothing happened. Then several video files appeared on screen, all labeled by dates. The earliest one was from 4 years ago. My hand actually shook a little before clicking play. The video opened slowly. And there she was, Linda. Thinner than I remembered already, pale from treatment, wearing the gray cardigan Emily bought her one Christmas. For a second, I couldn't breathe right. You think you're prepared to see someone after they're gone. You're not. Especially not moving, not blinking, not looking directly into the camera like they're talking to you from another room. Linda adjusted herself in the chair and gave a small, tired smile. Hi, Danny. I covered my mouth immediately. Her voice sounded weak but calm, practical, exactly the way she always talked when things got hard. If you're watching this, she said, then I probably ran out of time. I stared at the screen in complete silence. Behind her, I recognized the sewing room wall and the old floral curtains she refused to replace for 20 years. Normal things. That somehow made this harder. Linda explained everything slowly. Not dramatically. Just facts. Years earlier, while helping organize old company paperwork for taxes, she noticed inconsistencies. Invoices that didn't line up. Vendor addresses that didn't exist. Missing equipment purchases. At first, she assumed it was bookkeeping mistakes. Then she started digging quietly. I didn't tell you because you already blamed yourself for everything, she said softly. That line hit me harder than anything else. Because she was right. After the business collapsed, I carried that shame everywhere. Men our age do that sometimes. We turn failure into identity. Linda continued. She'd tried reporting concerns anonymously years earlier. Nothing happened. Kevin had relationships inside city contracting offices, Rotary clubs, Chamber of Commerce circles. People liked him, trusted him. He knows how to make people feel comfortable, Linda said. I leaned back slowly in my chair. That was exactly it. Kevin could walk into any room and make people feel like old friends within 5 minutes. I used to admire that about him. Then came the twist I never saw coming. Kevin was running for Tulsa City Council. I actually paused the video and stared at the screen. I'd seen yard signs around town recently, but never paid attention. Now suddenly everything clicked into place. The campaign dinners, the charity appearances, the church photos online. He wasn't just protecting his reputation anymore. He was building a bigger one. I pressed play again. Linda coughed hard for several seconds before continuing. At one point, she looked so exhausted I almost shut the laptop. But she kept talking anyway. Men like Kevin survive because decent people stay embarrassed, she said quietly. I sat there frozen. Then she said the thing that finally broke me. Danny, I know you trusted him, and I know part of you will blame yourself after hearing all this. Please don't. Too late. I bent forward with my elbows on the table and cried harder than I had at her funeral. Not loud, dramatic crying. Just exhausted old man grief that comes from someplace deep and ugly. I cried because she carried this alone for years. Because I ignored her instincts. Because while I was sitting around feeling sorry for myself after the business failed, my wife was quietly fighting for me behind my back while dying of cancer. When the tears finally stopped, the kitchen clock read 1:14 a.m. I kept watching. The later videos became more organized. Linda had spreadsheets, timelines, instructions. Every piece of evidence carefully explained like she knew I'd struggle putting it together alone. Then came the last recording. She looked terribly thin by then. Her wedding ring hung loose on her finger. I don't want you living with hatred after I'm gone, she said softly. She paused a second, catching her breath. But I also don't want you living inside a lie. I stared at the screen long after the video ended. The refrigerator hummed quietly behind me. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice down the street. And for the first time since finding the envelope, I seriously considered walking away from all of it. I was 58 years old, tired, alone, half broke. What was revenge going to fix? Linda was still dead. The business was still gone. Then I opened another folder from the vault. Inside were handwritten notes about former employees. One guy lost his home after we shut down. Another got divorced 2 years later. One older technician named Carl now drove Uber at 69 because his retirement disappeared with the company. I sat there staring at those names. Kevin hadn't only ruined me. He'd ruined people quietly, gradually, in ways nobody ever connected back to him. That changed something inside me. Around sunrise, I finally called Rachel Bennett, Linda's cousin in Dallas. Accountant. Sharp as a razor blade. She answered on the second ring. Long silence after I explained everything. Then she sighed softly. I wondered when you'd finally find it. You knew. Some of it, she admitted. Linda trusted me with the financial side. I closed my eyes. How long? Years. That hurt too. Not anger. Just realizing how many people knew my life better than I did. Rachel stayed quiet a moment before saying, Linda didn't leave you revenge, Danny. I looked toward the dark kitchen window. What did she leave me then? The truth, Rachel said. What you do with it now is up to you. And honestly, that scared me more than the lies ever did. The next week felt less like revenge and more like unpaid office work from hell. That's probably not the dramatic answer people expect. But the truth is, exposing somebody carefully takes a lot more sitting quietly at kitchen tables than screaming. Every morning I'd wake up around 5:30 out of habit, even though I hadn't run a job site in years. I'd make coffee, feed Linda's old cat Jasper, then sit down with stacks of papers spread across the table while Rachel called in from Dallas. Most of our conversations started the same way. You there, Danny? Unfortunately. That usually got a tired laugh out of her. Rachel turned out to be exactly the kind of person you want during a crisis. Calm, organized, no patience for self-pity. While I spiraled emotionally, she focused on facts. Dates first, she'd say, emotions later. The problem was the evidence wasn't neat. Some of Linda's files were crystal clear. Others looked like they'd survived a tornado. One USB drive had corrupted folders. Several scanned invoices were half unreadable. Linda had written notes everywhere in the margins, sometimes so quickly I could barely recognize the words. And technology was not exactly my strong point. At one point, I accidentally deleted an entire folder Rachel needed. I stared at the screen in horror. Oh no, 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 no. Rachel stayed quiet a second. Danny, I deleted it. You sure? Yes, it's gone. Another pause. Did you check the recycle bin? Long silence. Then oh. Rachel laughed so hard she snorted. Honestly, it felt good hearing somebody laugh inside that house again. But underneath all of it, tension kept building. Kevin started calling more often. Not aggressively. That almost made it worse. Friendly check-ins, casual conversations, too casual. One afternoon while I was sorting invoices, my phone buzzed again. Kevin. I let it ring twice before answering. How you holding up, he asked. Fine. You eating all right? There it was again. That same practiced warmth. I walked toward the sink and looked out the kitchen window while he talked. A lawn crew worked 2 houses down. Their leaf blower buzzed steadily through the neighborhood. You know, Kevin said grief does strange things to people. Something about the way he said it made my shoulders tighten. Meaning what? Just don't isolate yourself too much. I didn't answer. Then he added casually, "You've been downtown lately." My stomach turned cold instantly. He knew, or suspected enough to fish carefully. I had errands, I said. Another pause. You ever need help sorting Linda's paperwork, I can come by. That nearly made me laugh out loud. Instead, I said I'm managing. After we hung up, I stood there staring at my reflection in the dark microwave door. For 37 years, I would have trusted that man with my life. Now every sentence sounded poison. That night, Rachel and I uncovered something that hit harder than the stolen money. Linda had been quietly paying former employees overdue bills from her personal savings. Electric bills, prescription costs, small mortgage payments. Nothing flashy. Just enough to help people survive. I found handwritten notes clipped beside checks. Carl's wife's surgery, Mike behind on utilities again, anonymous. My chest tightened so badly I had to stand up from the table. Linda never told me any of this. Not once. While I sat around drowning in my own shame after the business collapsed, she spent years trying to clean up damage Kevin caused. I walked out onto the back porch and sat there in the cold for a while. The neighborhood was quiet except for distant traffic from Highway 64. I kept thinking about the energy cancer stole from her near the end. And somehow she still used what little strength remained protecting everybody else, including me. A couple nights later, Kevin showed up unannounced. I saw his truck pull into the driveway around 7. Immediately, my pulse kicked up. I stepped outside before he could knock. Cold wind moved through the trees between our houses. Kevin held 2 coffees from Quick Trip. Thought you might need one. He smiled the same way he always had. That easy, familiar smile. For one dangerous second, I understood how he fooled people so long. Appreciate it, I said, though. I didn't take the coffee. Kevin glanced past me into the house. You been sleeping okay? Not really. Yeah, he nodded sympathetically. Losing Linda, that's hard. I studied him carefully under the porch light. Did he feel guilt saying her name? Anything at all. Then Kevin said quietly, she always had ideas in her head sometimes. There it was. Tiny, subtle, careful. But enough. I felt heat rise into my chest immediately. What's that supposed to mean? Kevin lifted one shoulder. Nothing bad. You know how she got. Suspicious sometimes. I stepped closer before I realized I was moving. Kevin noticed too. The smile disappeared from his face briefly. Not fear exactly. Calculation. I could almost see him measuring how much I knew. You should go home, I said quietly. Danny. No, seriously. The old porch boards creaked underneath my boots. For a second, I honestly thought I might hit him. Not because I'm violent. Because grief and humiliation can build pressure inside a man until suddenly he barely recognizes himself. But then I remembered Linda sitting weak and exhausted in those videos telling me, I don't want you living with hatred. So instead, I stepped back. Kevin stared at me another moment before nodding slowly. All right. He set both coffees on the porch railing and walked back toward his truck. Right before getting inside, he turned. If there's something bothering you, he said carefully, talk to me before you do anything stupid. Then he drove away. I stood there long after the taillights disappeared. The coffee cup steamed quietly beside me in the cold. That was the moment I finally understood something. Kevin wasn't scared of the truth itself. He was scared of losing control of the story. And suddenly, for the first time in 15 years, I had the version he couldn't manage. The next morning, I contacted a local investigative reporter named Glenn Harper. Nothing dramatic. Just an email from a burner account asking if he'd ever looked into campaign finance irregularities tied to Kevin Hanley. 3 hours later, he responded asking to meet. That same evening, Rachel texted me a screenshot from Kevin's campaign page. Fundraiser event, Thursday night, downtown Tulsa Conference Hall. I stared at the date for a long time. Then I looked over at Linda's notebook sitting beside my coffee cup and quietly realized the end of this thing had finally started moving toward us. By Thursday evening, I almost didn't go. That's the truth. I sat in my truck outside the hotel conference hall for nearly 20 minutes with the engine running and Linda's USB drive in my coat pocket trying to convince myself this was still worth doing. Rain drizzled lightly across the windshield. Downtown Tulsa traffic crawled past in blurry red reflections, while talk radio muttered quietly through the speakers. I remember looking at my hands on the steering wheel and noticing they looked older than I remembered. Veins standing out more, skin rougher. Funny the things you notice when your whole life starts changing shape. Part of me wanted to drive home. Heat up canned soup, feed the cat, watch old reruns, let Kevin keep lying until the world buried both of us. Because once I walked inside that building, there was no putting things back. No returning to ignorance. No pretending anymore. Then I remembered Linda sitting in that sewing room during chemo recording those videos while I slept in the next room, completely unaware she was carrying all this alone. That settled it. I shut off the truck. The fundraiser was being held inside one of those mid-range downtown hotels businesses use for weddings and insurance seminars. Nothing fancy. Beige carpet, artificial plants near the entrance, coffee station beside the ballroom doors. A volunteer near the check-in table smiled politely. Campaign guest. I nodded once. Inside, maybe 70 people milled around, holding plastic wine cups and paper plates with cheese cubes and crackers. Mostly local business owners, church couples, retirees, and campaign donors. The room smelled faintly like coffee and hotel air conditioning. I spotted Kevin immediately near the small stage. Navy suit, American flag pin, easy smile. Working the room like always. For one strange second, seeing him there almost made me emotional. Not angry. Just sad. 37 years of friendship standing under fluorescent lights pretending none of it happened. I took a seat in the last row near the projector table. Nobody paid much attention to me at first. That helped. A woman from Kevin's campaign eventually stepped onto the stage and introduced him, while polite applause filled the room. Kevin walked up smiling confidently. Then he saw me. The change lasted maybe half a second. But I caught it. His shoulders tightened slightly. Smile faltered, eyes locked onto mine. Then he recovered. That's who Kevin was. A man who recovered quickly. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began warmly. Same voice I'd trusted for decades. He talked about small business values, community leadership, integrity. That word almost made me laugh out loud. I barely heard most of the speech honestly. My heartbeat was too loud. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket. About halfway through, I noticed Glenn Harper entering quietly through the back doors carrying a notebook. Good. Kevin kept speaking. Because this city deserves honesty from the people serving it. That's when I stood up. My knees actually cracked loud enough for two people nearby to glance at me. I walked toward the projector table slowly. Every step felt strangely calm now. Like the fear had finally burned itself out. Kevin stopped talking mid-sentence when he realized where I was heading. Danny, he said with an awkward chuckle. Didn't know you were planning to join us tonight. A few people turned toward me politely. I didn't answer him. I just plugged the USB into the laptop connected to the projector. And nothing happened. My stomach dropped instantly. The screen stayed blue. I clicked again. Still nothing. Behind me, I could feel the room shifting uncomfortably. Kevin stepped off stage carefully. Danny, he said quietly, maybe this isn't the place. My hands started shaking. For one horrifying second, I thought maybe I'd brought the wrong drive. Or corrupted it somehow. Then the laptop froze completely. Oh, come on, I muttered under my breath. A couple people exchanged awkward looks. Kevin approached closer now, lowering his voice. You're upset. I understand that. Let's talk privately. That almost broke me. Not because I believed him anymore. Because part of me missed believing him. Then suddenly the screen flickered. A file menu appeared. I heard Rachel's voice in my head immediately. Always make backup copies, Danny. Thank God she forced me to. I clicked the first folder. The projector lit up with invoices. Transfer records. Bank statements. The room went completely quiet. Kevin stopped moving. I opened another file. Timeline spreadsheets filled the screen. Amounts highlighted in red. Shell company names. Dates stretching back over a decade. Murmurs started spreading softly across the ballroom. One older man near the front frowned and adjusted his glasses. Then I opened the final video. Linda appeared on screen. Thin, pale, wrapped in her gray cardigan. The room fell dead silent. You could hear the air conditioner humming overhead. Linda looked directly into the camera. My name is Linda Mercer, she said softly, and if this video is being shown publicly, then I'm probably no longer here. Nobody moved. Even Kevin stood frozen. Linda calmly explained everything. No screaming, no theatrics. Just facts. Fake invoices, transferred money, forged signatures. Then she said Kevin's name. Out loud. Several people turned slowly toward him. Kevin's face had gone completely pale now. He tried stepping forward once. Stopped himself. Linda continued speaking gently from that little sewing room. For years I stayed quiet because my husband already blamed himself for losing everything. My throat tightened hard. Then came the line that changed the room. Kevin Hanley stole from good people who trusted him. Silence. Heavy silence. Finally, an older man near the side wall stood up slowly. I recognized him after a second. Carl Benson. One of my old technicians. 70 if he was a day. Carl looked directly at Kevin. I lost my house, he said quietly. Nobody answered him. Another couple got up and walked out. Then another. The room slowly started unraveling without anyone raising their voice. That's the thing about public humiliation when you're older. It's quieter. Kevin finally found his words. This is nonsense, he snapped weakly. She was sick. She misunderstood financial documents. Stop, I said. Not loudly. But enough. Kevin looked at me. Sweat glistened across his forehead now. For the first time in my life, he looked small. I stepped closer slowly. You didn't just take my company, I said. You took away my wife's peace during the last years of her life. Nobody spoke after that. Glenn Harper kept writing in his notebook quietly near the back. Kevin opened his mouth once more. Nothing came out. And suddenly I realized something strange. I didn't hate him anymore. Not really. I was just done carrying him. I unplugged the USB calmly, picked up Linda's folder, and walked toward the exit while voices slowly erupted behind me. Outside, cold night air hit my face hard. Rain mist drifted through the parking lot under yellow streetlights. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear anymore. From release. As I climbed into my truck, the local radio host interrupted a commercial break. A developing controversy tonight involving Tulsa City Council candidate Kevin Hanley. I sat there listening for a moment. Then I turned the radio off and drove home alone. The strange thing about revenge is this. People think it feels explosive. Like fireworks, like victory, like the end of a movie. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it feels quiet. 3 weeks after the fundraiser, I was standing in line at a Walgreens buying antacids and cat food, while 2 women near the pharmacy whispered about Kevin Hanley losing his campaign. That's how small towns work. Nobody says your name loudly when you fall apart. They just lower their voices when you walk by. By then, Kevin had officially withdrawn from the Tulsa City Council race. Glenn Harper's article hit 2 days after the fundraiser. Then another reporter picked it up. Then local television stations started digging through old contracting records. After that, things unraveled fast. Former employees came forward. Suppliers started talking. Civil attorneys circled like buzzards. Nobody dragged Kevin away in handcuffs. Real life usually isn't that cinematic. Instead, people slowly stopped standing beside him. And honestly, that seemed to hurt him more. One afternoon, I drove past a diner Kevin used to practically live in. Saw him sitting alone in a corner booth, staring down into a cup of coffee while nobody approached his table. I kept driving. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. Just exhaustion. Because exposing the truth didn't bring Linda back. The house still felt painfully empty every morning. I still reached toward her side of the bed sometimes before remembering I'd spent another night asleep in the recliner. I still caught myself listening for her cough in the hallway. Grief doesn't disappear just because somebody else finally gets punished. If anything, the quiet afterward feels heavier. Rachel called often during those weeks checking on me. You all right? She asked one evening. I don't know yet. That's honest at least. I laughed softly at that. A few days later, Emily came by with groceries and stopped in the kitchen suddenly. What smells different? I looked around, then realized what she meant. I'd started cooking again. Not much, eggs mostly, soup, bacon once in a while. Little things Linda used to do automatically. The kitchen finally felt alive again instead of abandoned. Emily noticed the cabinet doors too. I'd fixed the squeaky hinge. Mom would have liked that, she said quietly. That nearly broke me right there. The final envelope stayed unopened on the kitchen counter for almost a week before I finally worked up the courage to read it. I took it with me to Linda's grave early Sunday morning. Cold November air, gray sky, wet grass bending under my boots. The cemetery sat on the edge of town beside a line of bare trees. Linda always liked quiet places. Even when we were younger, she preferred back roads over highways and small diners over expensive restaurants. I sat beside the headstone for a long time before opening the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter folded carefully in half. Danny, if you're reading this, then you probably finally know the truth. I'm sorry I carried it alone so long. There were so many nights I almost told you everything. But every time I looked at you, I saw how much guilt you already carried after the business collapsed. I couldn't bear adding more weight onto you while you were trying so hard just to keep us afloat. You were never weak, just trusting. And there is still goodness in that, even if it cost us dearly. I had to stop reading for a minute after that. Wind moved softly through the trees overhead. Somewhere nearby, somebody placed flowers on another grave. I kept going. Please don't spend whatever time you have left chasing anger. Promise me that. I don't want the rest of your life becoming about Kevin. Men like him eventually empty themselves out all on their own. What I want is simpler. I want you to live. That line stayed with me longer than anything else. I folded the letter carefully and stared at her name carved into the stone. Married 31 years. And somehow I still hadn't fully understood her until after she was gone. Then I noticed one final document tucked behind the letter. Mortgage paperwork. Stamped paid in full. I frowned immediately. At first I thought it had to be old paperwork by mistake. Then I saw the date. 6 months before Linda died. I actually laughed once out loud sitting there in the cemetery. Small tired laugh. Of course she'd done that too. Rachel later explained Linda had quietly recovered portions of the stolen funds over several years through settlements and dormant accounts Kevin forgot existed. Not enough to rebuild our lives, but enough to finish paying off the house. She never told me. Probably because she knew I would have tried giving it back to creditors or using it to reopen old fights. That was Linda. Always thinking 3 steps ahead emotionally. A week later, Emily asked again whether I still planned to sell the house. I looked around the kitchen before answering. Morning sunlight came through the curtains Linda picked out 15 years earlier. Coffee brewed softly beside the stove. Jasper slept near the heater vent like he owned the place. And for the first time in months, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. No, I said quietly, I think I'm staying. That afternoon, I rehung Linda's old measuring cups exactly where she liked them. Probably sounds silly, but grief lives in little routines. The final scene people probably expect is me standing victorious somehow. Truth is, the last real moment of this story happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was making eggs in the kitchen while old country music played softly through the radio near the refrigerator. Sunlight hit the counter. Coffee smelled fresh. And suddenly, without warning, I started crying. Not hard, just quietly. I stood there holding a spatula like some tired old fool while tears rolled down my face. Then after a minute, I wiped my eyes, finished cooking breakfast, and sat down at the table. Because life keeps moving. Even after betrayal, even after grief, even after the truth finally arrives. And maybe that's the real victory. Not revenge, just finally being able to live honestly again. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, or realized too late how deeply somebody loved you, I hope you hold on to the good ones a little tighter. Sometimes the quiet people beside us are carrying far more than we ever notice.